Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World. I am broadcasting from what was the isolation station during lockdown. It's now the sanitation station and the recuperation station because I am full of Lemsip, paracetamol, ibuprofen, honey and lemon, and all kinds of things that are used to get over a cold, which has just hit me like a ton of bricks over the last 2 days. Before we do crack on with today's conversation, which is going to be an epic conversation, we're joined by Angel Castro from Deutsche Telekom. And Angel is going to be talking to us all about Deutsche Telekom's kind of like learning journey that they've been on over the last number of years. They've built a hell of a lot of NLP-based solutions and NLP-based tools over the last few years, and we're going to be talking all about those successes and those learnings. So we'll bring Angel on in just a moment. But first, a shout out to Deepgram, our presenting sponsors, and Symbl.ai. Symbl.ai is a conversational intelligence capability. It's a suite of APIs that allows you to access data within conversations that you really didn't know even existed. You can do a whole range of different things, from topic summarization, intent classification, speaker diarization. You can actually take a conversation and generate a summary of that conversation using the Symbl.ai capabilities. You can even build your own agent assist capabilities as well. So if you wanted to build something that can sit and listen to calls with your agents and guide them around next best actions and those kind of things, you can build all of that with Symbl.ai. So if you are in the market for some conversational intelligence, you want to see what it's all about, then do visit Symbl.ai. That is SYMBL.ai. For those of you tuning in on the podcast, SYMBL.ai. Thank you, Symbl, for presenting VUX World. And our next presenting sponsor is Deepgram, which is one of the leading providers of automatic speech recognition technologies out there right now. Organizations all over the world are using Deepgram to power their voice assistants and voice capabilities across a whole range of different channels, including the call center, which we're going to talk about with Angel today. So if you are in the market for some speech recognition that you can retrain based on your specific use case in your industry and your products or services, which very few people do, and it pains me to see people using off-the-shelf solutions and wondering why it doesn't perform as well as it would do if you were to do something different and train it specifically to your use cases. So do check out deepgram.com if you want to take your speech recognition to the next level. deepgram.com/VUX World. We're doing 2 webinars this month. One we're doing with Deepgram, and that webinar is called The End of... Can you repeat that? And that is all about how to create truly conversational AI, how to create a voice assistant, voice capability, whether you're building it for a website or an app or a device or your call center. How do you create something that is truly authentic, truly natural in the way that it converses with people, something that can actually really understand people of all different languages and accents? And how do you create that experience that is what people expect of conversations? We're going to be getting into that. We're going to be joined by Scott Stevenson, the CEO of Deepgram, and Dion Milson, the CEO of Illyrian AI. And we're going to be talking about how you do that. So what I'll do is I'll put the link to this in the show notes so that you can join it. I'll put it in LinkedIn if you are tuning in on LinkedIn in the comments. There's that one. And I'll also put it in this chat here if you're tuning in on the YouTube. And if you're on a podcast, you can get that in the show notes, as I said, or on the website. The second one is with audio codes. Now, one of the biggest stumbling blocks of implementing AI services into call centers is the actual integration part. Getting it actually implemented into your call center is one of the hardest parts. It takes a hell of a lot of heavy lifting to do. So it doesn't really matter how well you build that voice bot. What matters is whether you can actually get it in front of people. And what audio codes have is a very unique solution that will enable you to do just that very simply. It takes all of the pain and heartache out of integrating voice bots into call centers. And so I'm going to be speaking at the Audio Codes webinar at the end of this month. And I think you should join us, because if you are even remotely interested in putting voice assistant capabilities into call centers, which a growing number of people are, you will definitely benefit from this, because it will tell you how to do it. So please do join us on the 29th of March for that. Now, without further ado, please welcome onto VUX World, Angel Mario Castro Martinez of Deutsche Telekom. Angel, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Ken. Thanks for a nice introduction.
No problem. No problem. Thanks for joining us. That felt like a bit of a long intro. Apologies for making you wait for so long just back there. But but we're here now. We're here now. Excited to chat. And yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself then. A bit about you've been working at Deutsche Telekom for quite some time now. You've got a decent amount of experience with speech recognition systems by the looks of things. Wonder if you can give our viewers and listeners a bit of a background about yourself and what you do at Deutsche Telekom.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, hi, my name is Angel Mario Castro Martinez. I work at Deutsche Telekom for almost 5 years. Yeah, no, actually 5 years in January this year. So, yeah, quite a long time. It feels like yesterday because it's been changing very rapidly. So, I guess that's kind of the feeling of the working in a fast moving world. Yeah, that's my background. So I started speech recognition probably as a project in undergraduate studies, and then ever since I fell in love. I looked for a graduate program. Went to Oldenburg to do my PhD. I mean, I'm still haven't defended, but it's almost there. So fingers crossed. And I work for a bit at Amazon Alexa in Aachen, and then afterwards I joined Deutsche Telekom. So I've basically been working in um, most of the conversational AI stack. So speech recognition, natural language processing, or NLU, dialogue management, and speech synthesis. So yeah.
Nice. And what is your role at Deutsche Telekom then? What is it that you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, well, interesting. So currently, actually, as so my official role is lead architect, and what that in more pragmatic terms means is all over the place relating projects we actually have something to do with this conversational AI. So with my background, so in some of the projects, I'm a bit of a technical advisor in how to implement best practices for designing digital assistants, and in some others. So in the main other big project that I'm part of, it's my role as a lead architect was to basically design a conversational platform as a service with these modules that I've mentioned together with my team, and yeah, so provided for internal and potentially external consumers.
It's interesting, isn't it? I've been looking forward to this conversation because there's a trend at the moment happening where you've got organizations that have been investing in conversational capabilities internally, excuse me, that are looking to acquire external capabilities to bring in-house. For example, you look at Walmart acquiring Botmock. Walmart have been building things over the last number of years. They acquired Botmock as a way of kind of bringing some outside technology into their stack. So usually what happens is an organization looks out over to acquire technology to bring it inside. Whereas what's happened here in your case sounds like the reverse of that, which is quite unique, which is that technology is being developed inside, presumably for internal use cases, that has got to a point where it's actually ready to be released potentially, as you mentioned, outside. It's quite a unique situation.
Yeah, and actually, part of the blessing in disguise is this very strict data privacy rules in Germany. I mean, well, in Europe altogether, but particularly in Germany, which um, when I first joined was kind of like, okay, so can we not just get something out of the box, like you mentioned with some of those providers. Although I do understand the trade-off that it's not as easy as, okay, should we just take something out of the box, or should we just customize to our needs, right? So there's obviously pros and cons, and happy to go deeper into this evaluation. And it's far from generic. Yeah, with experience, I learned to distrust traditional benchmarks, or even sales pitch of, yeah, we're the best. Of course, who would say they aren't? But yeah, so I guess that the bigger pusher for all that was focusing on data sovereignty for our customers, and that has led us through this path of uh, well, some would say reinventing the wheel, but I would like to call it kind of like breaking the wheel and starting again. So
Interesting. Data sovereignty. That's a really good way of thinking about it. So that was the predominant driver for this course of action, was it? Was all around data protection and security.
yes, absolutely. So we take a Deutsche Telekom. utmost seriously the previous. So we actually yeah. So in everything that we do, so it's even internally sometimes it's a bit painful to. You would expect that as a customer, right? That was at least my impression before joining the company. That okay, finally I'm gonna get like tons and tons of data, because every time I call Deutsche Telekom, the first thing they ask you is like, yeah, can we record your call for performance purposes? And I mean, I've never, that I recall, have said no. So I thought like, okay, maybe a lot of people are in the same situation, and we'll get just all the data, and it's going to be super easy and all rainbows and stuff. But no, I mean, it's super hard getting inside, even inside working at Deutsche Telekom, getting data, and it's yeah. I mean, you wouldn't. Obviously, I don't want to draw comparisons because there's differences all over the place. But at least from the places I've seen work and talk to colleagues, it's the most well, the place where they take that the most seriously. And yeah, you see it exactly in the accessibility that we have. We have to follow very strict protocols for how we're gonna not only access it but process it, and how are we gonna make sure that that data, like personally, I think that it's a little bit now it's become data a bit like uh, radioactive waste. Like it's great for generating something and energy, but then you have to be very, very careful on how do you process, store it, and eventually even dispose it, right? So in my mind, it's a good analogy.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's interesting. Deutsche Telekom, obviously, it's a huge company, lots of different products and services, lots of different divisions of the organization. It reminds me a little bit of, I've done a lot of work with government organizations in the past, and you would have in some government organizations one department that processes kind of like, personal information for tax purposes, for argument's sake, and another department that processes personal information for something like passports or parking permitting or something like that. Excuse me. Those two can't really talk together, because when you opt in to pay a tax or whatever it might be, that data is confined to that division. And so it's always a historic issue internally, is that data exists everywhere, but the privacy policy that's entered into by a customer and the organization restricts that data from even moving out of parts of the organization into other parts of the organization. Is that a similar kind of issue that you've come up against or challenge?
Yes, no, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. So it's exactly that. So there's the entity you have to define. I mean, I've learned quite a lot of legalese in this types of working with data and trying to getting the data actually about what we are able to do, and all the promises and all the policies that the producer of the data, the consumer, the processor, and the levels of responsibility that each of these parts across groups, across organizations, and even within colleagues. It's yeah, you have to be very, very aware. So I mean, we do trainings like all. I mean, to my knowledge, every employee has to go through these trainings about the privacy and the security and all that stuff. Even whether they're gonna access data or not, right? So at least that they are all aware, and that we can share a common framework for why is that so important, right? So and entering so my first role was a machine learning engineer when I joined Deutsche Telekom slash data scientist. And it's like a data scientist without data is kind of like cutting the wings off of a bird. So it was pretty frustrating at the beginning, but later on, after developing like production systems, I came to appreciate and even completely understand why is it so important that we get that the fundamentals first, and then yeah, we can all uh, uh, play around with models and stuff. But the basic most important thing is how do we manage and store the data.
Mm. I'm liking these analogies. So far, we've had uh, data within the organization is like radioactive waste, and lack of access to data for data scientists is like chopping the wings off a bird, which is both definitely true. And maybe that will be the description of this when it goes out, as incorporating those two. That's good. Um, so what led then to the creation of this platform? And in fact, let's maybe start by talking about what this platform is. So, what is it that Deutsche Telekom has actually built to be able to deliver conversational interactions with customers?
Right. I mean, so what this platform is, it's called VoiceCast, by the way. It's just combining organically different services according to the applications, right? So if you contrast it with traditional well-known B2C platforms like Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant, they are functionally, I mean, not internally probably, but functionally, they work as a monolith. What I mean is that you get voice in and voice out, and the intermediate processes, they sometimes they're abstracted. I mean, I know that there's ever increasing tools and SDKs and whatnot to get as a developer a little bit more of that access of the intermediate stages, particularly for debugging purposes. While we kind of flip the script on its head and basically build each service or each yeah, so we call it service, but not precisely like a microservice in terms of the architecture, but like a core service of each of the AI capabilities. In this case, the speech recognition, and that on its own can perfectly fit just for particular applications. Like in the case of websites, we just need a light wrapper for just translating into text instead of using the keyboard. So that's one of the main drivers, and then organically grow. Okay, do you need the text as an output? Yes. Okay, so then you just get the transcriber, right? So we call it the transcriber. Do you need if you don't care about the text output, but you care about the intention of the words of the spoken utterance, well, then it concatenates the output to the next module, the NLU, without having to return, right? So a lot of these decentralized applications or these services, for example, Microsoft, that have the cognitive services, it's like, okay, you call the transcriber, then you retrieve the output, and then you make another call, and so on and so forth. And what we designed was a platform where you could actually, by design of how you register your application, you also register how what kind of output you're interested in. So if it's just text, if it's the intents and entities, if it's maybe sentiment analysis, if it's voice to voice. So that's kind of all allowed, and it sort of grew organically according to the demand, which also was kind of the fuel that kept us pumping, because it's a constant. Well, I don't want to say the word struggle, but it's kind of like a constant challenge to keep validating why is it that we need to do our own thing, right? Why don't we just use X, Y, and Z? And why are you not compatible with this super beautiful service that is much more performant and whatnot? So those challenges, I mean, we continue validating them just as we grow in demand organically, and that's where we found our niche. Sorry. So by just focusing on the customer needs, right? So if there's a particular application where not only the development part, but the need is for a particular type of output, we could easily customize, right? So we are not under the impression or the illusion that we're gonna beat all the bigger competitors and that our models are gonna outperform everything. No, but what we can do, and we are focusing is and in being very laser focused on the use case, on the domain, and then producing models that are going to outperform out of the box solutions in those particular domains, while preserving the data, so it's easier for our customers to just coming from that understanding of how do we handle internally our data. They say, like, of course, so there's a problem, here's our data, get our model, and we move much faster than having to do this whole process step by step, or even with out of the box solutions.
Interesting. Got Andrea Stang. I don't want to mispronounce that. Apologies. Very interesting discussion, chaps. Thanks for the event. You're very welcome. Thanks for tuning in. So where did it start then? You mentioned speech recognition for kind of like taking voice and translating it to text on websites and stuff like that. Is that where it began? Did it begin with speech recognition? I wonder if you can talk us through the evolution of where it came from and how it's evolved.
Yeah. I mean, actually, it started all with speech recognition. So that's what I was most familiarized with due to my previous experience at Alexa. And I knew that it. I mean, naively, I thought, like, of course, we can just get a prototype in a couple of months and then replace whatever our current service was, right? So our current provider was. That came out of the frustration of the long development cycles. Without any like, not saying that the vendor was particularly terrible. It's just that that customization, or that actually development cycle of, okay, so we found these errors, and just the role of us internally would just be limited to finding errors and dropping, and then expecting for something to happen, and then like making some pressure and aligning, and so on. And that to me was a bit too painful to endure, so I just came with that proposal: why don't we take matters in our own hands? And the proposal, I remember, it was like 4 years ago, but it feels like yesterday. Or the USPs were like, okay, so even if it does not outperform what we currently have, that also provides us leverage to actually uh, get better results, faster results from our current providers, which is not only one but many, depending the application. Because as you mentioned, Deutsche Telekom is a huge company, so there's like whatever service provider there is, there's one group that is using it. The good the good part of it is that it will provide us a bit more understanding of also it was advantageous for the providers, because we could have like an easier conversation by saying like, okay, certain errors are easier to fix than others, and sometimes probably our lack of common context would prevent us from understanding why some errors were more difficult than others, while having an own model will made it easier to compare apples to apples. That was how it all started. So just self-trained model for German. The initial use case was for um, customer service and hotlines, and the other advantage was that um, uh, the most of the models back then were just trained for high quality resolution in terms of speech, right? So I'm talking about like high sampling rate, like 8 kilohertz or higher, 16 kilohertz. Sorry, not 16 kilohertz or higher, and some of the codecs for the line, for the hotline, because it had to basically um, support all the legacy technologies like copper lines and so on. More often than not, were like the recordings or even the interactions were coded in Mula, which is kind of like the lowest quality there is. So the models were having very difficult time like parsing that, and that was another problem to solve with our own models. And basically it grew from that initial prototype to the point of, okay, so there's something to it. Let's build a platform around it to provide the scale that we need in all our services. And yeah, so that's what kickstarted stuff.
Interesting. So then what happened next? It moved into NLU, presumably, to try and classify some of the text that you were receiving.
Correct. Yeah. So the next logical step was of course NLU, because most applications were okay. So yeah, I mean it's good and all that you get the text, but I mean there were a lot of problems with that, because it's normalization and so on. So it's not just that you could just simply use the text for most applications. You also need to have this component of what to do it right. So if ASR is important, is to the extent of understanding the utterance, right? So not just reading it. If for reading you anyways need a human reading the text, right? So and right, so and touching on that aspect actually, kind of accidentally, our other purpose was not actually to replace any kind of our agents. So that's something that we also have to be very very clear and upfront about it. So while some of the platforms and services that's kind of their pitch, right? So yeah, reduce your cost center cost and whatnot. Our idea, or our pitch was more in enhancing, right? So that the same people could provide service to more to more customers, and then the waiting lines will be lower, and so on. So our target was never, or our main KPIs were never in terms of like reducing the number of agents, but like increasing their capacities, providing them superpowers basically. So
Yeah. Most call centers these days are just generally overworked anyway, aren't they? And there's no chance of a bot coming through in any time soon and replacing. It's more a case of helping manage the inevitable demand that call centers are facing, kind of thing. It's interesting. So what kind of use cases is this platform covering? Then it sounds as though there is like you've got this kind of modularization of it, whereby if a business unit needs to use the speech capabilities, it can use that. If another unit needs to use the speech plus the NLU, it can use that. Maybe another one wants to build some kind of like conversational use cases, and so you kind of like use the dialogue management as well as the TTS and stuff like that. So, what kind of use cases is all of this stuff supporting at the moment throughout the organization?
Several use cases. So one of the most probably in the interest of something different as opposed to regular chatbots is like a panel for our finance unit, which would have access to all the KPIs and all the legalese. And that's actually another part that was particularly challenging about the model, right? Understanding legal terms, financial terms, it's quite challenging for humans, let alone for models. So then they have their own mixture of English, German words that are kind of like, weird or even it makes no sense in either language. It's kind of like a telecom a term, and that actually was the sort of the use case is actually for the user to just say like I need this particular KPI or three-letter acronym, which in big corporations is kind of like the credence, and instead of digging into this dashboard, which all the columns and menus and whatnot and tables, we just kind of understand and parse that and say like, here is the information you need, and if you need more, I will store that context just for you to retrieve it afterwards, right? So things like what was the revenue that particular time period. And that was another challenge, right? Recognizing accurately the time period, because it's also can be expressed in different ways. And once it got to that panel, so it was a combination. So it was spoken output was not necessary, because the combination of the visual and the input and even the mouse and so on actually made the experience complete. It's not that the voice part replaced the text or the dashboard or or whatever it was working already. It was that just made it more accessible, and that was a very interesting use case that we had in the past. So it came with a lot of challenges, interconnecting databases and so on for the knowledge graph internally, and understanding that as a basis of a knowledge graph. That was one of the interesting projects, I would say.
Interesting. It's something that it's becoming to be something that's more spoken about, and we're seeing a little bit more of those. But those internal use cases are a lot less common, but still tremendously valuable, because people internally have the same problems as customers, which is that accessing information, finding stuff, and getting things done is they expect the same level of sort of convenience as customers do when using any kind of software, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I came to appreciate both sides of the corner, right? So the V2C products. I mean, on the one hand, you get like a lot of scale and a lot of interesting use cases, and a lot of edge cases as well. So things that are just particular for the one person or a couple of individuals. Uh, but but the thing that you could sort of for good or evil is prioritize and say like, okay, here is the boundary, and any specific edge case requests that do not exceed this threshold in terms of demand or whatever KPI it is, they are just not going to see the light. That's just the reality of things. Whereas in B2B, it's more like, okay, any little huge edge case or individual functionality that will provide value in a particular perspective has to be implemented. The question is just when, right? So it's a bit harder to just decline functionality or not customize it, and the conversations and the alignment, it's a bit more personal, right? So you normally, as a developer of an AI service for B2C, you don't go and talk to the customers and say like, how do you like your Siri model today, right? So it's, of course, indirectly you do, but more in aggregation than actually if you were to say, yeah, I mean, I tried it today and this particular thing didn't work, and that already enables you this fast iteration cycle to fix it, to correct it, to enhance it, or even is the feeder of some of the ideas for our next services that say like, okay, that this there's a lot of, like, this application needs something like that, and this other something similar, and then just combine the idea and make something reusable. That's kind of how we've been operating.
Interesting. Having that speed and control is definitely a definite value add if you've got the resources internally to be able to, build out those use cases using your own technology that you kind of control. You've got a lot more control and flexibility over the kind of experience that you can provide. When you're talking about, taking this capability, I'm assuming it's also running, powering use cases around, call center automation and stuff like that. Is it?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So when you take this capability and you're kind of like getting to the point where you, as you mentioned at the top of the show, you're kind of on the verge of potentially releasing this out into, the public sphere, so to speak. The public sphere as it is, and the market for conversational technology is obviously expanded heavily, and there's been lots of funding put into this industry and the platforms, and Gartner has now kind of twigged onto the value of these platforms with its recent enterprise conversational AI magic quadrant report. How would you explain to a potential technology buyer that maybe has the Gartner magic quadrant report in hand, looking at Cognigy, Core AI, OneReach, OpenStream, Boost, Avamo, a bunch of these others? How would you kind of explain what's different about what you've built to somebody who is coming from the outside, potentially wanting to use this technology?
That's a very good question. I mean, I guess um, could be. I mean, like the existence, right? So it's, I find it much harder explain something that it's like you're the first users, right? So I mean, we didn't have that particular experience at Alexa because they joined in 2016, so there
Mm,
was the launch in 2014 of Alexa, so it was easier, but still plenty of people didn't actually knew the product, right? So it's harder to simulate. Okay, yeah, how do you explain it, right? So it's like explaining radio of television to somebody who has never had that experience, right? But in our case, we have already that background to compare and to take as a comparison. But it's more about explaining the differences, because naturally now that people and that this conversational AI revolution has like taken over industry and several industries, it's more about the, okay, but how are you different to X, Y, and Z, right? So we have to focus more on those type of questions rather than what is that you do, right? So if it's like,
mm,
yeah, ASR, people now understand that, even the acronym, right? So when I started the field, that you say ASR and just like, okay, I don't know what you're talking about, speech recognition, and then you say like, ah, yeah, you recognize the voice. It's like, no, not really. So it's recognizing the text within the voice, and yeah, so these kind of things and technologies were completely uh, unconceivable to some extent to people who weren't deeply involved or in that technical field. And now it's more about how is it different to X, how is it different to Y, in terms of business models, in terms of the data protection, in terms of, and a lot of times people haven't considered those aspects, right? So there's data sovereignty, then people say like, what is it, why is that important?
mm,
And having that kind of experience of how this is more our approach of how do we explain uh, yeah, the
mm.
product, the platform.
Yeah, I think the data sovereignty is a really good angle to kind of to go with, because most of these, although some of them will offer like an on-prem solution, or you host it in your own cloud and stuff like that. A lot of them do, they are kind of like hosted and managed, not necessarily managed in all cases, but definitely hosted with the provider, so to speak. So I wonder whether you can kind of talk us through what your approach has been to data privacy and security. Obviously, you've got a lot of people calling your call center, talking with their audio that's being fed into your models, and then text that's being fed into your NLU, and there's a whole load of data being captured. What's your approach to the security of the data side of things?
Right. So I mean, yeah, we could have a whole podcast about all these little safeguards that we have, but I would say that of course we base our own um, design of how to process data on our internal regulations and GDPR and so on. So, for example, we one of the basic principles was preparing for this right to be forgotten, or explicitly from one customer saying, like, you know what, erase everything that has to do with me or my voice or whatnot, right? At the same time, it's a challenge because it's a bit initially I found it a bit contradictory. I now understand that there's a good compromise in between, but like, how do I erase your voice at the same time while I don't want to actually store anything that I don't need to store about you, right? So querying the files about, like, you, for example, Kane, then I will have to store your name, but that's information that is not strictly necessary. I don't really need your name as the user of the voice to train my models and to improve my models, right? But at the same time, I do need to know, in case you say, like, you know what, I don't want my data to do anything with the model anymore, then how would I? And I cannot listen to the recordings, right? So it's a bit of problematic. But what we did was provide, of course, user IDs that were a little bit like hash, sort of like passwords, and then associate that to the user ID that were coming from the application, and the boundary of the PII remains at the application, and the request we get from the application that, okay, user that hash wants all the data erased, and the storage that we have is so it has a table where, okay, so all the hash users then could be used as the key to delete all those files in batch. So that's one of the things that we did to provide this kind of compliance by design. Another thing was, of course, in terms of the time that we actually are able to store the particular utterances or verify utterances. So all data sets, all the data points, utterances are encrypted, and we rotate the keys and so on. So it's a standard common best practices. But but one thing on top is the fact that we try to first this get a good distribution of the use case. That's why we focus a lot before we start storing data. We focus on having a good alignment with the potential user or application, and what are the relevant use cases, what is the domain, what is the scope of the application, and we focus on getting, for example, for the speech recognizer, if it's used, a dictionary of the words that will be used, right? So of course it's not just strictly about the words that will be used, because it's hard to say, right? So you also have like this free will kind of component that you cannot predict how exactly customers or your users are gonna say what they want to say, right? And that's part of the challenge. But for the better part, like things that we focus more. So for example, in the finance bot, um, um, we had a particular pre-requirement of what type of data we wanted for the model to perform to acceptable levels, and all the information that came on top from that threshold was no longer required, right? So that's something that we get to do once. I mean, the initial planning, it's a bit time consuming, and sometimes it can actually take a couple of months, but it pays off once the customer understands, okay, this is the purpose. It's not that we just want to say no, or to delay your deadline, but it's mostly that all these things have to be baked in. So all these considerations: how much is too much data, how much is too little data, if it's too little data, what kind of data we actually need, right? So without having to be very invasive. And also we have because it's a separated service, all the services are distributed in a service mesh, and the proxy for those services have authentication baked in. So for example, if the application comes with a user hash key, so it's like XYZ blah blah, and your preference as metadata and the scope of that token is I don't want my data to be stored, then that will automatically bypass that. So it's not that it gets stored as anything else and then erased. No, it's never stored, right? So those type of things are what allow us to now that groundwork is done, allows to go much faster. Initially, it was what held us a bit back, and there was we sometimes wanted to make a bit more compromises, but we knew, the team and I knew that was important to get straight from the get-go.
It's interesting that, I mean, there's so many layers of security that you just mentioned there, which is, especially in Europe with GDPR and stuff like that. I think that it will, having all of those different features and all of that kind of like robust kind of like features, I think is a definite good shout, because if and when you do release this, into certainly, as I said, in Europe and the UK. Yeah, that's the hot question that everyone has is, what do we do about GDPR? Where does the data go? How do we store it? How do we delete it? How do people opt out? All that kind of stuff is something that doesn't really get spoken about enough, I don't think, in the terms of talking about this kind of technology, but is an absolute deal breaker, or will be. Interesting. So when we spoke beforehand, you were also mentioning some other kind of innovations that you've been working on aside from security, which is around kind of like semantic search capabilities and stuff like that. I'm wondering if you can shed some light on how that looks.
Right. Yeah. So just to close the topic on security, I think that that's a very important point you mentioned, right? So if you get the product and then, as an afterthought, want to be compliant, that's much harder than if you advance, right? So that's why it's yeah, I don't regret that we took that extra path. So but yeah, coming to semantic search. So as I mentioned, the platform, it's growing organically. So once we have like the archetype of what a service should include, so it's like a service is comprised of the AI part, if you will, and the software part that surrounds that model to serve it, right? So that server has this functionality that I mentioned about, like, it knows how to forward a particular request, not back to the source, but maybe to the next attack, like to concatenate to different services, and things like that. So and regarding semantic search, is something that we consolidate from different ideas that before we were involved in getting these one-offs for example, for the finance, but it has its own so its own knowledge graph, but we didn't have not the permission to actually reuse those terms, because of course they were very specific to finance, and we didn't also have like the chance of indexing the data directly, which would have made the task much easier, because there were the actual numbers, right? So, and that's always, like, when it's about numbers and money, it's super sensitive information. So so yeah, so those things were kind of like constraints, but gave us the experience of, if we were to build a general service for different applications to sort of as a basis for that semantic search capability, how would that look like? And that's what got us into creating now a general purpose semantic search, which has this offline component of indexing the data sources, and it uses a neural model to process the queries, which is also we got experience from the NLU of understanding the chatbots in the particular language, and what are the edge cases, and what are the best models or pre-trained models, and we incorporate that experience into the processing part, so the query part of the whole pipeline. And yeah, so that we haven't released it yet, but we're working on it, and it's yeah, it's been quite exciting. So I'm sorry, so I just gave for granted that everybody was familiarized with what semantic search was, so it would have probably been useful to start. So semantic search is the problem of retrieving information, right? So it's also called information retrieval, and the neural part of it is like in the traditional sense, as in the neural part. It's called symbolic versus neural. The process is the same. It's just what is the point of the process, right? So is one part is indexing all the information where you want to query from. The other point is how to process the query from the customer, and then the matching algorithm to find the indexes, or to match the indexes with the query, right? So indexes very much in the sense of books, right? So it's just like a key that provides you access to the actual content, right? So And in the neural part, both the indexer and the processor for the query can be, that they don't need to be, but can be neural networks, transformers or what have you, and the algorithm also can be anywhere from just cosine similarity to something a bit more complicated, and that's what we're currently working on.
Interesting. Kind of maybe it's a related question from Alex Dubois here. Is what we've spoke a lot about data over the course of this conversation, uh, either lack of it or using it to build and train models and stuff like that. Alex is asking, what do you use to label and maintain training data? Is that something proprietary that's built as well, or I wonder if you can talk us through your approach and what you use for that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So it depends. So for speech data, because we couldn't just use um, external services or cloud services for labeling the data, we had to come up with our own internal development as well. And then we just extend on it. So and nowadays, I mean, we took inspiration in a lot of the tools out there. And believe me, we tested a lot. And sometimes we found tools that we liked so much that we were a bit angry that we couldn't use them because of that limitation. But it helped us also build our own labeling tool.
Interesting. Nice. What would you kind of like after all your experience of, you know, one building the actual technology that's powering these experiences, but two being involved in advising the teams that are building these experiences. What would you sort of say for those that are, the proportion of people tuning into this that are going to end up going away and building their own platform is probably slim compared to the proportion of people who are going to utilize a platform to build something. What would your kind of like key lessons or takeaways be from if you put your advisory hat on, thinking about the way that teams go about designing and developing these solutions? What do you think are some of the kind of like key lessons or takeaways that you would give for people looking to implement these kind of like speech and NLU based capabilities?
Um, well, first and foremost, understanding the trade-off, right? So it's not everything we're doing is not everything like so this build versus make versus buy. So this is yeah. So it's quite a difficult question to ask. It depends quite a lot on the context, on the long term view, right? So if right now things look very I don't know, like in favor of a particular path, you have to kind of ask yourself, okay, so what is the roadmap of this? For instance, if you are favoring your own development because currently the solutions do not provide you what you need, you have to ask yourself whether eventually they will, or whether they will be the demand, or even why is it that you actually want it, right? So so there's this point that is the total cost of ownership, that it's at the forefront of any kind of development, AI related or not, and it extends to not only the cost of developing and getting something out of the gate, but also maintaining, and also having a concrete plan of how to eventually discontinue the platform or the services that you're offering, and how to do that, and how much buffer are you actually allowing yourself to do that in case that worse comes to worse and you are run out of customers, or your problem gets solved, or your problem is no longer relevant, right? So asking, like, spending a lot of time in these first questions, I think is imperative. And once you decided that yes, it makes sense, it makes of course, so there's a technical feasibility, to see if you got the skill set, the people, the it's not so easy. I mean, of course, nowadays it's a bit a paradox, right? So technology and TensorFlow and whatnot and pre-trained models have allowed a lot of people, like the entry barrier has lowered quite a lot, but that's just in terms of development, in terms of prototyping, in terms of making proof of concepts, and also probably for research and academia. So for those purposes, obviously that's the best you can do. But the big bottleneck, or the place where maybe 90% of these prototypes never see the light, is how are you gonna turn this idea, this prototype, this proof of concept, into an actual product that stands on its own feet, and it doesn't require ongoing uh, budget from innovation or from whatever, just to stand on its own feet, right? So it's very hard, because also the business model more often than not don't make sense, and if you don't have the operational skills, the operational excellence, or the team to actually provide that, it's really hard to find this niche or customers or competitiveness or USP. So those things play all a role in these formulations, right? So it's not only understanding the problem, the context, but also, okay, so if you already decided, yes, I want to do that for X, Y, and Z reasons, and it makes sense. There's technical feasibility. It's gonna provide value, and we have certain restraints that favor our own development. The important question is how are you going to be able to execute, right? So it's not so different like in the startup world, where of course the idea might be brilliant, but if you need more than, like if you need more money to solve a problem that not a lot of people care about, then there's this kind of gaps and disparity initially might be compensated with funding or even scale or all these kind of metrics that I'm kind of like probably not the best person to talk about those. But I think that from what I read and from what I've exchanged with friends that are working at startups or having startups themselves, it's very similar, right? So you have, like, when you create such a project, that it's always going to be facing this fierce competition, internal and external, that okay, why don't you give up? Why don't you use that service? Like, they have like an army of people like you. Why is it that you want so badly to do it, right? So you have to have that very clear in mind, and actually um, um, yeah, force yourself to say no to a lot of things that might look so brilliant and so cool, and but focused, right? So be focused. That's kind of like my keywords there.
Nice. Wicked. Well, Angel, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an absolute pleasure. When can we potentially expect to see something, if we do, and what's the best way for people to reach out and learn a bit more?
Well, on the same line of thought, right? So about deadlines, I think that the easiest way to kill a very stressful project is to give a unreasonable deadline. So I wouldn't venture myself to say like, yeah, wait for Q3 or whatever. It will have to come from organic demand. So most likely it's not going to be publicly released and mega advertised. I don't think it makes sense to get into that.
Mhm.
But it's mostly the collaboration we have with external customers that allow us to get to that stage. And if there are customers line up for that, it's going to be through those channels, and not so much like a big splash into, yeah, try out the new latest
Yeah.
telecom platform. So
Cool. Sounds good. Well, I look forward to it anyway. Angel, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. And we'll speak very soon. Thank you everyone for joining us as well. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you, Alex and Andreas, for your comments and questions. Thank you, Taras. And yeah, please do join us for the webinar next week with Deepgram. Links again are in the show notes and in the chats here. And the webinar at the end of the month with audio codes. Please do join us for that as well. Until next time, see you later.
thank you. Have a nice one.